Pranav from Masters in International Relations Student Association.
And this is Tanzia from the MIRSA Association as well.
So today it's our pleasure to have Miki Jacevic with us in conversation. And Miki, thank you so much, first of all, for your time. And my first question to you is, how do you personally define security?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I define it, as you saw in what I talked about, through a very personal lens. And so I strongly believe in the concept of human security, which is that every person, every man, women, young, old, all the transgender communities we just talked about, has a sense of three elements. One is the physical security, which is that you're safe to wake up in your home, you're safe to walk on the streets, you're safe to send your children to school. Second is what I call the social security, which is that you have access to basic services so that if you choose, you could have a job, you could again send your children to school, you could have access to all sorts of facilities from either government or non-governmental institution. And the third one is security and safety to express your own identity. And that means that, again, for some of us, our religious identity is very important. For some others is our tribe or ethnic identity. And whatever that is, we have to be free and safe to express it.
Thank you so much for that answer. Miki, in your opinion, what is the role you see for women in security, and how can men and women facilitate change towards this goal?
Well, let me just say I've been working literally 25 years to answer that question, so I know we don't have enough time, but I will say what I have seen around the world are three things, which is when you access and ask women and men at the grassroots level and at all levels of everything that's happening. They are typically the holders of the solutions. They know often where the weapons are, where the trouble is going to come from. They know how to prevent it, including, indeed, in many of the countries that we all come from, the role that mothers play in terms of really being socially invested in not losing their family members. So again, we need to do who these people are. And then secondly, we need to give them a voice. We need to go and ask them. We need to seek. We cannot continue to pretend that politics can be an elite business. And that's why I'm thrilled about your program to see so many people from so many countries, because that is the future of all of us coming together and investing in your generation through your many nations, which in a way is giving all of us a voice. And then the third thing is we need to get that access and that input into the official policy processes. And at the local level, that means where do we put a lighting on the street? Where do we get the schools so that the girls can come to school easier? What are the facilities at the police station so that police women can be able to do their jobs? All of those basic operational questions are the answers to say all of us have both a say and a practical way to contribute to our everyday safety and stability, because peace is not an elitist business. It's how we live life. And it's our job as practitioners, as you, as a young generation of students, to change the way that we do it right now.
Next up, a very important factor is, how do you define international security and how can we achieve it?
Oh my God, you old people. I would have written 3 PhD topics with your questions. So I can only say it how I do it, so I don't conceptually write. And even though I do have a chapter in this book, you all should check it out, which is, again, similarly to what we were talking about, kind of the bottom-up approach. So we need to change the top-down approach. And that has to be that all of you entering this field really have to understand, even if you end up working for your foreign ministry or Ministry of Development, even Ministry of Security, you have to remember this practice that you have to ask the people whose lives your policies are going to be impacting. And so particularly in terms of security sector, that does mean where should we put the police force? Where do we put the border? How do we get more women into border services? How do we train our border people to recognize trafficking in human beings as a big threat, not just the old military trainings that still dominates the security field? So I would say what needs to change is not only how we make these decisions, which again goes back to asking the people whose life we are affecting, but also how we, as particularly as governments or international organizations, go about carrying our daily business. And so a lot of that has to mean that we have to leave fancy rooms like this and go and really spend the time with people in their own context and engage and learn from their experiences and then design our policy. So my biggest change in that regard would be that historically much of what has happened in the world was dreamt up and designed in big important rooms in colonial Europe, where the country's borders were defined without anybody ever being in those places. That's why we still suffer through the Middle East conflicts. Now, I think the voices of people living through it and the voices of people wanting to have a voice are significantly going to transform international security.
Can you have peace without justice? That's a very tough question, I know, but could you give us an answer on that?
I cannot, because and it's really, sometimes this is what I spend entire semesters teaching my own students, and what I can tell you that in my 25 years, so my own background is in topic of transitional justice, which very much is trying to answer that question. And so again, I obviously teach and explain some practical transitional justice tools, such as Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or the documentation memory, or building a memorials, which for some people is a element or a version of justice. Or I also speak with people who deal with amnesty, which is only provision in all 300 peace accords that we have had in the last 25 years. Amnesty is the only provision that's always there, which is simply the fact that unless people who are fighting are granted some form of coming back to society, they're never going to come back. And so I have seen daily the challenges of trying to find the right balance. And so while I cannot tell you yes or no, because literally in my experience, it's almost like every person in every community, in every country that has gone through those experiences has a different answer. For some, the only way justice is achieved is where the perpetrators are put in jail forever. For some other, the reality that in the Truth Commission some people apologize for what happened and yet they never went to jail might be enough. And so what I do say is I've seen sort of these four elements that need to be in play in some balance. One is this concept of restorative justice, which is building justice not just through the accountability or punishment, but trying to focus on restoring the relationship and building the fabric of society again. That is, again, not enough for many people, so we do have to have elements of retributive justice, which is some people do need to be held to the account, and they do need to go to jail or whatever the punishment is appropriate. And that's why this balance between restorative and retributive justice is key. But the second pillar for me personally of this whole transitional justice concept is reconciliation. And at that, we have two levels again. One is this national reconciliation, which is a peace process, where you do have to make some compromises, where the political leadership has to agree and say, we will sign this peace accords, and this is what it means to go from war to peace. But what we need much more, and we don't get enough of, is also societal reconciliation, which is what are the processes, particularly at the local and community level, where people can come together, can try to indeed talk about what has happened, address both the hurts as well as the positive stories of people often helping each other. Because however traumatic partition had been for millions of people, equally many people still remember the stories of their neighbors helping them during that time. And so trying to find that balance between, again, national and societal reconciliation and restorative and retributive justice is a journey for each one of us. But it is a key to be able to understand what the options are and to be able to have the agency to make that choice.
Thank you so much.
So the last question today that we have is, do you believe security as a concept needs to be globally defined so that we can move towards really beneficial securitization? Or do you think is it impossible to do that?
No, actually, I do think we have done pretty good with defining it, which is we do have clear ideas what human security is, how to do it, how to, again, train and change the concept of security sector so that our police and our militaries and our border police can really view this very differently, but also to understand that much of the actual stability and security threats for most people on the planet will actually not be coming from conflict as we know it, but it will be coming from climate change, from migration, from radical extremism of all kinds, including the Australian case of the person who killed 49 Muslims 2 weeks ago. So all of those new security threats are clearly pointing out that we cannot continue to think it's only about the nation state. It's only about the system in which a country has its own army, pretending that much of these threats are going to come from the outside. The reality of the world right now is that threats are either going to come from inside the country, which is the case of Syria, Iraq, Bosnia, Afghanistan, or they're going to be transnational in nature, which is a person from Australia goes to New Zealand to commit murder.
Thank you so much for your time today. It was really speaking to you. It was really a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both.